Thank you so much, Ansley, and thanks everybody I hope those of you that went outside got warmed up, and those of you who are still outside will come in and rejoin us. Anyway, this is the panel on the future of managing water resources, warm water, of course. We heard this morning some really interesting presentations, starting with Deputy Secretary Blaylock talking about the budget and the amazing amount of money that has been spent over the past 5 or 6 years by DEP, state of Florida, on water resources, and actually talked about the difference between the demand for additional financial resources and what's available. And again, Secretary Adam, thank you so much for your service. And we also heard in our previous panel what's going on in the current situation with how our communities addressing some of our water supply and water quality challenges, and how we're bringing them together with land use planning. And now we have the opportunity to talk about the future of those challenges, particularly how we bring together issues of integrated land use planning and water resource management need to go together. How we balance engineered, nature-based solutions with more traditional approaches to dealing with water, and how do we get those untapped resources that are going to have to make up that gap between, if we go back to that 2025 number we heard about from the Southwest Florida Water Management District, that demand number, if that's where it is, how do we get that additional water and make a difference? So we have a terrific panel that's going to address some of those issues. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce or read the introductions for the panel, and then we'll go through these really good presentations, and then we will have an opportunity to have a discussion afterwards, panelists, if in fact you stay within your time frames. Thank you. I have to say that because I've been a moderator on a lot of panels recently. And then hopefully if you have some questions here, you will not be shy about taking the mic and throwing some of your questions. Maybe if you have some insights about how we deal with planning and water resource issues. So first panelist we're going to hear from is Ansley Tilley. She's principal engineer with EcoSpaces. It's a firm based on developing large landscape, nature-based, watershed-level solutions to provide water quality improvements and resilience and water resources across the country. She has 20 years of experience covering design, construction, public-private partnerships, strategic consulting, municipal state land planning, compliance, and policy. She's recognized for her knowledge of the Northern Everglades system, water management, operations, nature-based solutions, and developing unique land and project deal structures that maximize multiple environmental benefits and funding. Prior to being with EcoSpaces, she led both public and private sector teams performing ecological and hydrological restoration and consulting on various projects critical to Everglades restoration, TMDL water quality improvements, flood protection and resilience, and other issues. She's now active in new market development for ecosystem services, environmental development, and pay-for-performance model performance. I think I said that wrong. I'm sorry, Ansley. I got the last sentence wrong. All right. Anyway, we're going to be really excited to hear from Ansley. After Ansley, we're going to hear from Pete Sechler, who's the director of GAI's Community Solutions Group, focused on planning, urban design, landscape architecture, and economic development in the eastern United States. His focus has been to work inclusively between public, private, and institutional sector to create opportunities for multiple benefits and shared success across the community. Mr. Sechler has also been involved in the following types of projects: citywide regional visioning, community development, transit-oriented urban development, Main Street urban walkability. I appreciate that, by the way. Projects, I'm a big walkability advocate. Public parks and trails. So welcome, Pete. We look forward to hearing from you. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Mary, what I never practiced saying the name, Szafraniec. Thank you. She spent 20 years in water quality ecological restoration space working in the public and private sectors at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Southwest Florida Water Management District. She worked as a consultant as an ecological engineer, scientist, and business development lead for water quality at WSP prior to joining RES, which is the organization she's with right now. She's currently national director for RES's water quality solutions team, where she is implementing large-scale water quality projects across the nation. She has extensive ecological water quality assessment and restoration background. She's acquired from her studies independent research at the University of South Florida, where she got her degrees. Her prescriptions for multi-benefit restoration are rooted in ecological engineering concepts that focus on resilient nature-based solutions. And finally, we will have someone that I had the opportunity to work with here at Winter Haven, Keeli Carlton, who is now over in Seminole County as their water policy program manager. Florida's natural choice working on implementation of the county's holistic water plan. She holds a degree in environmental studies, growth management from Rollins College, and has a graduate certificate in public administration from the University of Central Florida. She has 15 years of career experience with natural resource education and water industry. She's a current vice chair of, and I don't know what this organization is, but it's FSAWA. Tell us what it is, if you will. Public Affairs Council. She's a proud Florida native, passionate about outdoors, and passionate about it being a voice for the water, and I have actually witnessed that when we were here at Winter Haven. So that is our group, and we're going to start with Ansley. Look forward to hearing your presentation, Ansley.
Thank you, Eric. So I have slides. I'm going to talk to you. So Eric asked that I kind of have a little bit of a conversation with you about what it is that One Water means to us, some changes that we're seeing, and I think we've heard, honestly, a lot about what I'm going to talk about from some of our presenters already, but I kind of want to switch the message up just a little bit and allow us to start thinking a little more broadly beyond some of the silos. You've already heard Tabitha talked about silos. Beyond the silos that we all live in, we all work in, we all advocate for. And so right now, just looking through the room as you all introduced yourselves, one of the things I noticed is, we're sitting here in a room talking about One Water. And One Water really started from a utility perspective. But what I think I heard in the room is there's really not that many utilities sitting in the room. There's a lot of, I've heard environmental folks. I've heard, I work on water supply for environment. I haven't really heard anyone talk about water supply for agriculture in the room. Maybe you do work for that, or maybe you advocate for it. But I've heard a lot of environmental discussion, water quality discussion. So to me, that is already a start to Florida looking at One Water in a slightly different perspective than we see in history over the One Water initiative. So, I applaud all of us for recognizing that this is a little bit different here. I work across the country, and what I find, and people in Florida we all shake our head about how hard it is to do water in Florida, but in reality, we are way ahead of the rest of the country in so many ways. And it's quite impressive that we've been able to do that. But I think to some extent that's driven and as a result of our stormwater practices, our stormwater legislation that is very unique to this state. And as a result, we have already begun thinking about water differently. But I also think that that's maybe a little bit of a challenge for us. So when we think about how each of us work, we work water supply for environment, water supply for agriculture. We think about MFLs, right? We think about ecosystem restoration, but it's all using that same drop of water that Tabitha says we only have 1% of in the entire, over the entire globe. But why do we work in those practices this way? We work by function. We regulate by function. We regulate by what outcome do I want? And I want to be sure that when I turn my tap on at night, if I work in the utility world, that I can turn it on, water comes out, and I can brush my teeth, right? If I work on the environmental side, I want to be sure that the MFL is correct, so the estuary has the water it needs and the saline balance is correct. And when I think about agriculture, I want to be sure that when I show up at the grocery store, there's fresh from Florida produce, right? But we all work in these silos, but we're all here to talk about the exact same thing. How do we use the 1 drop of water time and time and time again, because we only get it once, right? So at the end of the day, how do you overcome the siloing that we all seem to exist in? Because at the end of the day, we're all here for the same purpose. And I think what I heard is we need to start integrating, right? I think I've heard we need to start thinking about it differently. But how do you force us to think that way, right? We're all very intelligent folks in this room, and as a result, we're already creating solutions. I heard of one water director, which you've got a company already, and maybe yours does too, that starts to think about how to integrate from the practice side as practitioners. When we think about government, we heard Adam talk about, they're already looking at how to use and create grant money in slightly different ways. When I heard from the CFWI, how we start looking at water differently, but I think we all come to the same obstacle every single time, right? We sit down in the room when we have to get into the weeds, and we say, I need a permit, right? And the permit regulatory agency says, no problem, what are you trying to do? What kind of outcome are you trying to solve? I need an ERP because I'm creating something on a piece of landscape. Okay, well here's your stormwater pond you gotta use. And you're gonna hold that water before it hits the system. You're gonna treat that water before it hits the system. And once you do all that, you can let it go to the system. Okay, well what am I gonna do with that water while it's sitting in that pond? How long is it gonna sit in that pond? What use is it giving us when it's sitting in the pond? And the answer is, I don't care, because I got my ERP permit, right? I can build now. So when we think about One Water, really I think our obstacles are our regulatory practices, because it's our regulatory practices that are driving us into the position of how we practice in private sector, how we design. Because at the end of the day, our client needs us to get a permit so that we can build. But that's not to say that the regulatory agencies don't have the same goals. But what is the driver? What will be the driver to get us to the point where we can start regulating differently, practicing differently, and actually accomplishing some of these things? And so we've got projects like the one Suzanne presented, several that Tabitha presented, and some that we'll see our co-panelists here present today. They're great projects, but they're also some of the hardest projects to get through the system. They're hard to design, they're hard to permit, and they're hard to get funded, but they're giving us the maximum benefit. So I challenge everyone here today, and again, I'm not going to talk for very long because I have no pictures to show you, and nobody wants to stand and stare at me all day. But at the end of the day, I challenge everyone as you listen to all of these different presentations and look at all of these different programs, what is the algorithm that gets to the heart of the issue, that helps us drive how we prioritize funding, how we prioritize what we do in design beyond just the single function that we've been hired to do? Because every single practice that we have, that we work on, every drop of water can do so many things. It doesn't have to sit in the stormwater pond. And then I also challenge you to think really, really hard, because Suzanne presented a really amazing project. She shows you it's a $100 million project, but it's an amazing project. DEP's told us he's got $2.2 billion in asks. He doesn't have $2.2 billion in funding. Adam does his very best, and so does his staff, to be able to distribute those dollars to all the entities that need them. So where does the other money come from? We've got user fees, great, consistent dollars. But they can only be so big before taxpayers say, hold it, too much, too much. So where does the other money come from? I really challenge folks to start thinking about these types of developments, because it is a development that you are producing. It's following the same rules as development. Look at it as environmental development, and is it investable? Is there a place here for the private sector to be able to step in and offer a path to get you to the end, to make up, supplement the dollars that we're seeing coming out of the state, that we're seeing coming out of the private grant funds, that we're seeing coming out of the federal grants? Because when I looked at Tabitha's spikes. One of the things that was absolutely remarkable to me is the number of little agency circles that were next to her big spike. How much work it is, and if you've had to go through this, it is a boatload of work to get all those little circles on that paper, to get all the funding that's necessary to one really amazing, very impactful, very important project. How many of those you got, Tilley? How many projects you got like that? Right, too many. She needs more circles, or does she need investable assets? What is the combination that can work there? So I sincerely challenge folks to think about it. How do we integrate it in reality, right? Get out of the silo, break the wall. Is it a funding thing? Is it a regulatory thing? Is it a practice thing? Yes, yes. And then actually doing it, and then figuring out how do we think about funding slightly differently. Because at the end of the day, if we continue to rely on the same process we have had for time and time again, and year after year, we don't hit the end. Tabitha never gets all the circles she needs. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Again, like I said, I'm gonna not talk forever and let somebody else talk about this, but I think that's the biggest answer that we need to find in the room today. And with this many people, this much interest and initiative to move things forward, there is a way. So, thank you.
Hey, it works. Good morning. My name is Pete Sechler. I'm with GAI's Community Solutions Group. I am working with the City of Winter Haven. We're on Black and Beach's team with John Dinges there. And we are the land use planner for all things associated with Winter Haven's One Water program, which I'm sure you're hearing a lot about today looking at the agenda. Part of my mission is to get off stage so these other folks can talk on time. So I want to try to leave you with just a couple of very high altitude sort of ideas about how we think about the relationship between land use planning, which is sort of an abstract idea, and One Water, which is another abstract idea. And most planners don't know much about the science of water, and I think maybe sometimes the water scientists haven't always thought about some of the planning aspects of how the way that we configure the world actually affects what happens with water and what the opportunities are. So working with Winter Haven and the whole team, obviously we're trying to figure out how to balance a water budget in Winter Haven over the long term. And it really has to do, I'm sure you've all seen this diagram, some water goes into the aquifer, some water evaporates into the air, and so forth. What we're really trying to look at is what's the performance of water on the ground in an urbanized area versus a suburbanized area versus a natural area, and how can we affect the water cycle and the quality of water in each of those environments. So what we've been doing is trying to understand the dynamics of growth in Winter Haven, understand the dynamics of water in Winter Haven, and then provide recommendations for what Eric Labby and the planning team can do within the Land Development Code, the Comprehensive Plan, and other implementation tactics to protect the lifespan of water. So a couple of really simple ways to think about it. This is going to seem really simple until it's all stacked up, and then it's kind of a little model of the world. The first idea is, you've got kind of two areas of growth. You've got urban areas, which are already there. They're in the city grid. We're in an urban area right now. And then you have rural areas, which are going to develop into some form of, urban or suburban development. So essentially it says you got two different types of development. You have places that are urban and places that haven't developed yet. That's like the whole world. It seems a little obvious, but let me keep going. You also have two different types of, just very simply, geology. You've got areas that have high recharge potential because they're high on the sandhill. And then you have areas that are high storage potential. Those are wetlands and other lowlands that gather water and allow for infiltration. Naturally, a lot of Winter Haven's existing historic urban development is high on the hill. So wherever these kind of tan areas are, that's where we've got high sand hills. That happens to be where all the development is. And all of these kind of lower areas are still largely agriculture, rural, or natural lands. So suddenly, you know, this image seems to make a lot of sense. There's a lot of development here that's historic, that's on the sandhill, and then things are gradually kind of chipping away at the fringes and figuring out how to get into that agricultural land, and in some cases even impinge on the natural lands. So our challenge is to figure out what we call sort of the areas of gray cover, which is the built areas, and the areas of green cover, which is the areas that are not covered or not built. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how to get green and blue areas that are better capable to filter, store, and recapture water so that we can reuse it in the water cycle in one manner or another. And in the sense of gray cover, we need gray cover because without gray cover, we wouldn't have a city. But we want to address the fact that the gray cover reduces or prevents aquifer recharge, it induces runoff, it induces all sorts of waste in terms of how we think about water. It also induces a lot of highs and lows in terms of flooding, drought, all those things get amplified in areas of gray cover. So our mission is to look at the natural areas and say, where can we preserve and enhance the quality of the green and blue systems that are part of the natural fabric of this area and make them perform at a higher level? And then how can we go into the areas where we're going to have development and say, all right, first of all, we've got these existing urban areas and we want to work on infill and reinvestment in those areas. Because every square foot of development that we can do within the established existing urban area certainly is a benefit because you're theoretically not impacting something in the rural area, okay? However, to the extent that we are going to build out in an agriculture or rural area, we want to start to think about how development can better leverage the green and blue systems and do a better job of maintaining the integrity of the water cycle. So we really want to maximize our urban areas and instigate redevelopment and reinvestment in our urban areas. And then we want to be a little smarter about what we do in the greenfield areas. Does that make sense? Pretty simple model. So then what we do, and I'm just going to buzz through some slides really quickly. I'm not going to talk about every single land use type. But the idea is to go through and look at how each of those areas are performing and actually even get into some detail and say, well, what kind of land is this? And what kind of land is this? And here's the existing residential neighborhoods. Here's the existing commercial core. Here's where we're starting to get new neighborhood development along what we're calling the Sapphire Necklace, these natural waterways over here, right? So we've gone through in a lot of detail, and we have identified each of the different land use types that are in downtown, and we've been working on how to get them to be more efficient, how to get them to be more conducive for reinvestment, and how we can also sort of guide development out here in the rural area. So what that kind of gets down to is what we think about a lot is ways to support compact development, efficient transportation so that everything isn't so sprawled out, and ultimately flexibility and ease with redevelopment. So we work on things like parking requirements and how big the lots need to be and how can we get a little more density in the right areas. How can we preserve open space in order to get development that we think is more conducive to water efficiency. And then ultimately, what's the approvals process to get through that? And then we work in the greenfield, we work with an idea that we're calling the Primary Conservation Network, which really has to do with how greenfield rural land gets developed in a more organized way. So if you have a large natural system like this, how can we start to get development to happen on the ground that shares stormwater systems and starts to build water infrastructure that is adjacent and supportive of the existing natural systems So these things are starting to work together. And actually, how can we get value out of both the natural green spaces as well as the created stormwater systems to actually create parks and open space and other things that provide other benefits to the community? And then where are the water storage opportunities and habitat preservation opportunities that are adjacent to that, where we can maybe acquire land or otherwise get land folded into the natural systems through partnership with landowners and land development. And then finally, you'll hear more today. I'm sure many of you have heard of the sapphire necklace idea. It has to do with connecting people, but it also has to do with activating and utilizing the resources that are sustaining the water supply, getting people to those natural resources. So what we are thinking about is a way of connecting all of the natural water systems in something that is environmentally beneficial and connected, using that as a rationale for how and where to focus regional greenfield development. And then ultimately, can we connect all of it so that the community can be part of a connected green and blue community, so that people can actually use that connected waterway system. And again, there's great examples of this in Winter Haven and around Polk County, this idea of sort of connected environmental wetland systems that also handle stormwater and instigate environmental restoration and stuff. We're envisioning a much grander scale for that, and something that shapes greenfield development alongside. So that's essentially our mission on the land use planning side. And I think we've got some folks who are going to talk about some specific project examples.
Really bad about time. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through these slides. Just wanted to talk about more. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. Oh, gotcha. So Mary Szafraniec, I actually cut my teeth from the science and engineering perspective in Polk County. I think I met Mike Britt when I started at Swiftwood in 2006, when this whole One Water thing started to become beautiful blossoming flower. And I'm so excited to be here to actually see this come to fruition. So it is very exciting. There's a lot of things going on. Polk County's very, very aggressive and advanced, and Tabitha, good luck. We're going to try and help you as much as we can, but I think that if other communities sort of fall in line and see how progressive this area is in the center of Florida, then we'll be able to really achieve a lot of things that we have set out. So what we've been hearing today is like, what are the problems? What are the drivers? That's already been discussed, and I think we all see there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of potentially easy-ish low-hanging fruit. Some of the things have already been tackled. There's still a lot to do. And then, as Ansley had mentioned, there's a lot of hard things to do left. We have to do. So I think we're at the hard part now, is how to actually do these larger integrated projects management of water. But then we have ways to actually do that in the hard ways. Integrated delivery, also called turnkey, also called alternative delivery. So there's a lot of benefits to that. That's how a lot of projects are actually occurring currently in Polk County. The Wilson Ranch project is occurring through a turnkey project, full delivery, where land was acquired by RES and working with the county. We have a 25-year contract so that that project will be entirely self-sufficient, and in terms of a nature-based solution, it's going to be fully functioning when it gets handed over to the county. There's a lot of procurement and legislative pathways that we're still kind of like in our infancy right now, and Florida is extremely lucky. I am a national director of water quality initiatives. I get to work in 18 states in the United States right now. Florida's one of maybe 3 or 4, less than a handful of states that have an actual P3 statute that allows for any kind of public purpose or use for a project. And it doesn't have to just be building roads or hospitals or schools. We can do this for the environmental benefit. So I just want to make sure everyone understands how incredibly important this is, and how we have like this easy button for the hard things to be able to move forward and achieve these One Water goals. I do want to note, so I think on the agenda it said something about engineered nature-based solution. What I like to call them is ecologically engineered, and we have several folks in the room that are ecological engineers, and we like to make sure we invoke ecology when we are doing the nature-based solution. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit gray, but if we can bring the green in there as much as possible and expand that toolbox as much as possible, then we're going to achieve really big things here. So this slide just kind of talks about the water management. I was a water manager. I was at Southwest Florida Water Management District. Prior to that at FDP. Basically have been looking at impaired waters my whole life. I didn't really get to spend much time on the beautiful waters. I'm always looking at the ones that have issues and figuring out how to fix them. So restoration is essentially where we're at in terms of how we're going to achieve these problems. But it's not only, back in the day when I was working early on, a lot of stormwater ponds, we still have to do those things. We still have to do the LID and the green infrastructure. But now to achieve these larger TMDL goals, the water resiliency goals that we have, that should always be connected. We don't want to separate those two things out. I know that funding is separated out, but in my opinion, I really do feel like those things are connected. If you're doing a water quality project, you're getting quantity benefit, vice versa. So when you're doing a watershed management plan, those two should be in kind of the toolbox at the same time. How do we benefit both? And the question is, how do we do these larger scale projects? In this region of Florida, we still have some land. I know we have the Northwest District here. They have space. They are currently in planning mode, how to handle all of the new data centers that are coming in and gobble up hundreds of thousands of acres of land. How are we gonna handle it? How are we gonna do restoration? If we don't know now where we're going to be placing these projects, then we're not going to be able to actually achieve those water goals. And they might make some mistakes, because as we grow, you kind of don't think through that. So everyone that has space right now that can actually plan for that is actually really lucky. And there are areas in the South that we were hearing earlier where they are very space limited. There are still innovative ways to do these types of large restoration projects, as you heard from Suzanne. I love that project, by the way. But I would love to know how long it took. I didn't ask the question, but I'm just curious. So in terms of addressing water quality and quantity, sometimes in the past, people would consider those competing factors. They shouldn't be. They should be overlapping. They should be considered together. And it really is, let's not miss opportunities when we are working up these different types of projects. And public parcels. So sometimes we're really lucky. The county, a city may have some public parcels, or a water management district or DEP, and then we can take advantage of that. But are they in the best place for optimizing a project, getting the most nutrient load reduction, getting the most water flooding attenuation, or aquifer recharge? Typically they're not. We have seen that with a lot of entities in the state. So then, like we were hearing, private parcels have to be acquired. And that's so that we can provide not only conservation, but also the restoration component and planning for that future growth that is just accelerating every single day. So I think private entities do have to take a big role, and that is where that public-private partnership approach and doing the turnkey approach is really helpful, because the private entities can spend that time where the managers at different government agencies are very time limited, they're resource limited. So that's the big thing that I'm hearing on a regular basis. We don't have the staff to do this. We don't have time to write the grant applications. We don't have time to go look and do all the land acquisition work. It takes a lot of work to get to those, even in defining those project parameters or doing the feasibility studies. So I think there's a lot of strategies that we can use to accelerate to get to those points. So I'm going to briefly touch on integrated delivery for integrated water management. It's really alternative delivery. So you all are very familiar, I'm sure, with the design bid build mentality and what's been done for a long, long time. Those projects in my world, when I was in the government, we would spend, I think, 5 to 10 years sometimes on a relatively large scale project, maybe 12 sometimes. But now you can actually accelerate that if you do have a private entity take that on, because they're actually integrating the whole entire timeline. So they're bringing in the conceptual planning, they're helping you work through that, they're doing the feasibility study. This is all under one umbrella with teaming partners, essentially, to come in and make sure that project happens very fast and that the funding is available, so that we're working to actually obtain the funding, secure that either through grant programs, legislative appropriations. We're currently still figuring that out right now after the more recent hurricanes that came through. But it really is more of a kind of consolidated effort, so you have a lot of people working on one thing instead of just one person working on a lot of things. And the other really nice benefits that I think, if I was back in the government, I would probably just jump on this, because if somebody told me that they're going to transfer the risk off of the government agency into the private entity entirely, then that would be wonderful. Because a lot of times risk is one of those factors, like, oh, I don't want to be flooding anyone downstream, I don't want to take on the full risk, I don't know if it's going to work in the future, who's going to maintain it once it's completed. All of that's on the private entity through the turnkey project. So I think that also does really feed into the cost effectiveness, because as soon as you expedite a project, you're essentially saving about 30 to 40% of dollars per year by not waiting. So if that full design is completed in 2024 and you wait another year or two to do the construction, you've now added another couple $1 million, depending on the size of the project, and I've seen that happen very often. The other item I really wanted to note is that whenever, like for Wilson Ranch project, our contract requires RES to actually meet a certain percentage of load reduction of the watershed loads coming through a 400-acre stream and wetland restoration project at the headwaters of the Peace River. So we actually have Saddle Creek, it's very near here, Saddle Creek and Peace Creek Canal that feed into the Peace River. It's the headwaters of the Peace River that feeds into Charlotte Harbor. We have to meet 10% or 20% of nitrogen and 10% of the entire watershed load. That's massive. It's tons of nutrients that are coming through that system. Not only nutrients, but also metals and bacteria and all the other things, and the amount of natural habitat that's going to be created on what was previously pasture, improved pasture. So phenomenal site. It's very close to here. I don't know if Tabitha will invite you out there, but it's an awesome place. I went there last week to go see what it looked like after the hurricane, and it's still in design, by the way. But we have to guarantee that long-term success. So this is changing a trajectory. If we employ more of these projects and require in the contracting that those projects are going to actually guarantee outcomes, and we have to show our measurable benefits, and not only do we have to do things for the nutrients, we're also going to try and bring in as much macrovertebrate diversity back into the system. A lot of flood attenuation, massive storage is going to be included in that project as well. So there's a lot of benefit to alternative delivery. Design build is kind of like on the closer to that, but then the design, build, operate, maintain, and monitor to show that we're actually doing something. So when I was at the district, a lot of times we build things, we didn't know if it worked. I'm sure many of you have had that same occasion. Make sure how much time I have. She admitted to one. Anyway, so just wanted to note here, some of these things are, in terms of the turnkey approach, people just kind of build them because they have like previous understanding. I prefer to do the science-driven side, right? To make sure that we're putting this project in the right place. So we look around, we see where the hotspots are, we see where there might be a heavy, heavy need, and we put that project there in that location. On the flip side of that is using science to actually also bring in innovative tech. So stream restoration, things like that, that will actually provide that floodplain wetland recreation, reconnection, aquifer recharge, always making sure it's a multi-benefited project in any way possible. Very quickly, going to go into the last part of the ecological engineer nature-based solutions. That's I just showed all of the different kind of, really great benefits that can be obtained if you do stack benefits on a project. So a little bit technical here, but across the nation, all of these different technologies are being used, essentially in agricultural areas, in urban areas, bioreactors, LID, for infrastructure, we heard that earlier. How do we use innovative tech to really expand and enhance in a very aggressive way in terms of tripling, quadrupling the amount of nutrient load reduction and also the flooding attenuation that is available? Stream restoration is one thing that Florida is just a little bit behind on. So across the nation, especially in Chesapeake Bay, where RES is very active, stream restoration is the biggest nutrient load reduction tool that they have for Chesapeake Bay. If they didn't have that, that bay would be extremely, worse scenarios as it is right now. And they're doing everything they can to reduce nutrients and other parameters. So you can do that on a very simple scale. So essentially doing multi-stage channel design, which is the one on the left. You see a canal there, trapezoidal, looks like we're really used to those, 50,000 miles of canals in Florida. And then from that point, you can do something very simple in terms of multi-stage. So that just kind of changes the cross-section of the channel, providing floodplain bench. So it's essentially building in a wetland on each side of the stream, and that is a massive machine for nutrient load reduction. The biogeochemical processing happens there, and it actually treats the watershed load, not only just the local erosion. The figure on the right, the far right, is showing actual natural channel design. That's what we're doing for Tabitha. She's going to get a new stream, essentially, born out of the canals that are in that system. Constructed treatment wetlands. We have some amazing designers here in the house from Jacobs, and I absolutely love constructed treatment wetlands. Sometimes they are the right tool, sometimes they're not. Sometimes when we don't have very high loads or high concentration, we don't want to use them. We want natural passive wetland floodplain restoration. These things are the engines of water quality treatment. So whenever we can use them, we should. There's a little bit more ecological engineering that has to be included in there, but they do provide massive benefits in all the things, ecological and water quantity, and also recharge if needed. I think I'm gonna skip this one, but this basically talks about why we want to do stream restoration. Would love to have another discussion on. That is, in my opinion, a one water item that needs to be included. So there's all these streams out there that haven't been restored. They all have the opportunity to provide additional restoration and load reductions and all the different benefits. Last slide here. So who knows of the public-private partnership statute? Yes, of course. A few of us, not a lot. So that's something you might want to look into. It's highly encouraged by the legislature, so much so that they actually, in July, just enhanced it and made it a little bit easier to be able to invoke that. It's essentially a legislation that allows an entity to accept an unsolicited proposal. And typically those entities, some of them charge fees for people to review those. It can be for anything that provides a public benefit. And environmental restoration is one of those things. And it is usually a very highly collaborative process where you're working with the entity. We had, I don't know how many planning charrettes for all the different projects, Tabitha and City of Winter Haven and Alachua County. We're moving forward with a huge stream restoration project and wetland restoration. Just keep meeting with everyone, making sure everyone's very happy because it's a partnership. And then those actually provide the ability to provide a large scale restoration project that then also allows the private entity to acquire land or somehow provide that land as an item, and also the funding and all of the other benefits that I just noted. And it provides the ability to bring in innovative solutions. So we can brainstorm together and everyone kind of come to the table and start talking about how we put these large projects together. So this is a really awesome tool. I feel like when I'm in different states talking about how awesome Florida is, always letting them know that Florida is way advanced because they actually have this statute. That's all I got. So, thank you.
All right, hello everybody. I'm Keeli Carlton. I'm with Seminole County. So we are about to step outside of Polk. I hear there's a lot of good things going on here, but let's take a little trip and transport over to itty bitty little county, Seminole County. We are Florida's natural choice, and that's because we are bordered on 3 sides by water. We have roughly 200 miles of rivers and stream systems throughout the county. And we're actually covered 40% by water. And we're also known for our outstanding springs. So as we're learning today, we have some awesome momentum going around all things water. And so I'm happy to kind of introduce a way that, at least at a county or city level, you can kind of bring that together and bridge gaps. Because we've been talking a lot about silos, but Seminole County in 2020 decided to make the Holistic Water Policy Program a key strategic priority. And so it was a direction from the board that we needed to kind of bridge those gaps because there was all these water policy things coming, flying at them, and they were like, well, let's just create a house for it. And here we are today with a water policy program manager kind of trying to take all of this and kind of put it together. And this is the overview of our holistic water policy. So it's basically to protect and preserve all water within Seminole County, creating sustainable long-term solutions to water challenges by shifting perspectives on water management and viewing all water as one water. And this can be achieved by obviously protecting the limited water resources that we have, enhancing our environment, and advancing community knowledge. So education is key to all of this. Within our holistic water policy, these are the main goals. We have our enhanced water conservation program. We want to develop alternative water supplies, enhance our watershed management program that we already have going on. Because we have those outstanding springs, mitigating septic tank impacts is huge. And then also implementing water utility projects and programs is key as well. So my position is actually housed within the Environmental Services Department, but I bleed into our utility very nicely, and also can sit at the table with all the other departments as well to talk about projects as they come up with like land use planning and code and stuff like that. So this is my first highlight, and it's obviously my favorite topic if you know me, which is water conservation, and I don't believe that it gets enough attention because, you know, it's the fluffy feel-good topic amongst the water utilities, or our little checkbox, if you will. But really, I think when we in Seminole County brought our water conservation program kind of outside that little checkbox into more of a policy, it's giving it more teeth. So these programs really deserve to be at the table when we're talking about a 5-year CIP or big projects that are coming. We need to have the water conservation expert at the table, and we do have a very robust program, and our water conservation person is here today, kind of learning from this as well. But the program is new, and we do have a water conservation plan that we follow very detailed, but this is also streamlining with our watershed management team. So she sits at the table for lots of different conversations, which is so important. And I think sometimes, you know, when we're talking about these large-scale projects, we're kind of forgetting about what's currently happening, and that's we're still using roughly 50% of our actual water supply. It's still going out onto lawns and landscapes. So again, this education piece, when we're implementing these kind of programs, the education to our general public, getting into the schools and all of that is still going to be super important, and it's a big piece of actual water policy is education. Let's go back to the basics. So yes, that is that. And then I do want to have discussion, and kind of towards the end here, I know Eric is gonna have more discussion, but this is a huge piece right now is reclaimed water. So it used to be the narrative of, you know, it holds no value. Please use it. We're coming in with reclaimed pipes and we want everybody to use it. It doesn't have restrictions. This topic, I really is part of our enhanced water conservation is, do we need regulations on our reclaimed water? Do we need those restrictions of, we don't want everybody to just keep using it? I don't know. I know we said there's a few utilities in here, but during those dry times, you guys, are you seeing it's just flying out the door and you're having to supplement maybe with potable water during those dry times? But then we're also talking about, we want to do all these cool projects to, you know, flood wetlands and restore, you know, maybe using reclaimed water, but are we going to have enough? So this is part of that discussion kind of towards the end, that please start thinking about that, like, how do we shift the narrative of, you know, don't use this is also a valuable resource too. And then another highlight, and Seminole County has like a huge watershed management program, and they have a lot going on with that, but we're part of that education piece. It does fall under the policy for education is, but we've got a fertilizer ordinance. We're, you know, trying to see where we can enhance those septic tanks where we might not want sewer going in. So there's lots to talk about, and I do want to get to that discussion piece because I know Eric has a lot of good questions for us, but I do want this to be interactive. If we can make this interactive, especially on the reclaim piece, because that is definitely something that we don't talk about enough. And I know in Seminole County we do have restrictions on it, but as people start to shift around Florida, if one utility is not doing you know, what the other one is, how are we getting that education out there? How do we start to streamline these types of programs, that education, the narrative across the whole state of Florida? But I really do want to hear from you guys on the reclaim piece, okay? And then just remember that it's all connected. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have that same end goal. We're all here for our water. How we get there might look a little bit differently, but there are definitely ways to create houses within your cities or your county and create positions like mine, so we can just keep having these awesome conversations. There's a house for it, and keep doing stuff like this. So thank you, and Eric, you wanna...
Well, now that was a very informed and enthusiastic panel. Thank you so much for all of your presentations. Now we're going to have a chance to cover a couple of questions that I have, and I hope that you have some questions too, because this is amazing content from a number of different perspectives. And the comment that caught me first, I want to see if I can get all panelists to try and answer this question, because it's a little complicated question, but Ansley, you kind of set it up, but you said there needs to be an algorithm for figuring this out. So if there was an algorithm, what would you plug into that algorithm to make sure that you got the right outcomes? And I want all of the panelists to think about that too, so see if you can weigh in after Ansley speaks about what should go into the algorithm. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first,
Turn your mic on.
okay. I think the first question we have to ask is, are we asking the right question, right? And usually it's, I have a water supply problem, I need to add a water treatment plant, or I need to add something. And that's your focus, and you're answering that question. And so you go seek dollars to resolve that. You design to resolve that. So if we're going to change the algorithm, before you stop answering the question, ask a couple more. And that's, I need to provide more water supply to my community. Well, and what else are you going to do within your community? Does your parks, natural resource group have another plan in the area that you could overlap with? Are you looking at your environmental restoration plan, your comprehensive plan for the next 25 years? Start looking at your water supply plans, align with your stormwater master plans, align with your growth and development plans, overlap things, and then ask the question again. And once you ask the question again, does the priority change slightly? Do you move the site? Is there a better location for it because it now meets and resolves the answer to 3 questions? So I say the first thing is, don't stop at the first question, and make sure at the heart of it, when you're trying to solve a problem, you've asked enough questions. And then once it's left the building, because you think you've solved the answer internally, you've asked enough questions. When it goes to the designer asks similar questions, and he says, am I solving it from a quantity basis, timing, distribution, quality? If I can't answer all 4, I haven't asked enough questions, solve all 4. And so it might take us a little bit longer to get there, but we certainly solve a lot more by asking more questions and answering them before we release the project for design and permitting.
Great answer, thank you. Who's next? Mary, go ahead.
Come on, is this on? Hello? Sorry about that. I think what Ansley had mentioned, so land use planning, I don't want to take this away from Pete, but I do feel that is like the critical factor in terms of, depending on if you're in a developing area or developed, and how incredibly integrated everything is. So we're not going to be able to solve the problem. Reclaim, I'm really glad you brought that up, because we have only so much wastewater, but then we have more and more potential stormwater that a lot of us haven't accounted for, and a lot of our previous stormwater systems maybe weren't prepared for in terms of the designing that occurred 20, 30 years ago. Things have changed. H&H modeling needs to be updated in a lot of places. So the algorithm, I think, has changed. So there might have been an algorithm that only had a few components. There was the equation of, you have stormwater, you put it in a pond, it goes downstream, gets treated, it goes downstream for a certain period of time. At this point, I think we need to be a lot more creative on how we actually integrate all those together. From the reclaimed water standpoint, because I do want to touch on that, I think it's an incredibly important component, and we're always going to have to treat that wastewater and use it as a resource beneficially if we can. But just from the example of some areas like Sarasota Bay and even Tampa Bay, we are now seeing that there needs to be additional treatment, from the science perspective of that. And it's something that I think Florida's a little bit more advanced and has had that understanding. We've seen that there's an issue, but we still want to use it beneficially, but we just have to make sure that we're using it appropriately. This is something that I've provided guidance in places like in Oregon, where they are brand new in their infancy, looking at reclaimed water and how they're going to handle it. They're doing the same thing we did about 20, 30 years ago, just applying it to land. A lot of it's running off. There's a lot of waste of good, valuable water. So it is still an incredibly important resource. It's just knowing how to manage it and how to treat it before it's actually applied to whatever land surface. In terms of like the spring sheds, I think that's a massive issue there, that we can't just apply reclaimed water to obviously in Florida spring sheds, because we need to treat that a little bit more. But in terms of the question of algorithm, I think it's just there's a lot of connecting pieces, and there's a lot of things that need to be looked at. And we can do that from a pretty technical standpoint. We have the tools now with GIS and modeling and different types of analyses. So from the integrated watershed side, I think it's doable.
And I just think, like I said, water conservation is my favorite topic, but that still needs to be thought about, even though we're finding these alternative water sources and whatever water we're going to be using is going to always need to be conserved for some reason. So we always just need to kind of plug that into it. I think sometimes we forget about it, and funding tends to go to the wayside for conservation projects when really, if that's our lowest hanging fruit, like why are we not just taking a bite of it and really, putting our money there? Don't let those funding sources go to the wayside. Keep plugging in conservation into every algorithm that we have. I think it's going to be super important. And it's our house for our education, and that is super important. I don't know if you guys have kids at home, but how are they coming home and influencing what happens like in your own home from things that they learned in school? So if we're, at the youth level talking about water conservation, and we have a big budget for education going into the schools, they're gonna come home, they're gonna influence us too. So we just have to keep that going.
I think, whoa, that's all you got. I think on the land use side, you can start with just some really simple ideas, like, what is your percent of?
Can you turn off that other mic?
Whoops. What's the percent of land that is still in green land cover versus gray land cover? There are a lot of discussion about just irrigation use, if that's half of our use of water. When we talk about taking areas that are already gray and instigating or supporting redevelopment, and hopefully redevelopment that's maybe a little more dense or compact or proximate to other development, what that boils down to is some things that you can measure, like how many square feet of irrigated landscape do we have per person or per unit in an area. So if we've got areas that are sort of within the city proper, we don't need to be having, we're not going to have as many big lawns that are getting irrigated, and we can also do a better job in those areas of getting into green infrastructure, to capture things more quickly and limit the amount of runoff that we have. Things like vehicle miles traveled are a big thing for us. Again, because it's an indicator of how connected the community is versus how dispersed it is, and then how much energy and how much water and everything else that sort of consumes. And then again, back to the green infrastructure thing, if we've got a certain number of linear feet of creeks or open water systems, dilated systems, as opposed to pipes, then that can get into questions about, well, can we get more infiltration going, and can we measure that? So there's a whole set of measures that the Black and Beach team is developing for the One Water project in Winter Haven. But for us, it's all about the efficiency of your community form, whether it's in the downtown or in the greenfield development.
Thanks, Pete. And the next question I wanted to ask actually was prompted some by your presentation, which was terrific. And you showed the integration of walkability and trails and parks into the system. So this is really a question for all four of you. But how do you make these projects appealing to people? Because ultimately, in the final decision, One Water, the most important ingredient in One Water is people. And their behavior, their perceptions, and whether or not they're going to call the city manager up and complain about something. So let's start with you, Pete, which is you're a designer, you're a planner. How do you fit the people into these One Water landscapes?
Yeah, I wish I had brought some pictures. First of all, I think one of the big undiscovered areas of work for us is retrofitting FDOT ponds or other kind of standard stormwater ponds into neighborhood parks and things that have other residual community value. So we've actually started to do that on a number of projects, and it just creates enormous benefit for the folks that live in those neighborhoods. They may not even have any green space. We are working on large areas within, say, a community like Winter Haven, where there may be redevelopment that wants to happen over a large area, and we will create shared regional stormwater and water volume facilities. But we will do them in a way that incorporates all of our best parks design chops. So that while you're building a stormwater facility, you can do it in a way that's artful, a way that has some program in it, things that people can use. And what I tell the parks people is, I've spoken on this topic a few times at the FRPA conference. What I think for parks directors is there's an enormous awareness in our society of the importance of open space and the value of open space, and even a growing consciousness of the value of our environmental systems. So the parks directors have the ability to provide something that is incredibly meaningful to the community and can also be incredibly meaningful to political elected officials. So you can get reelected on a really beautiful park that happens to be a stormwater pond. It's a little harder to get reelected on a pipe. It's not quite as exciting, even though it's extremely important. Now, the stormwater people, they have got a lot more money than the parks people. So there's this huge opportunity for a win-win scenario if the departments between parks and public works and even transportation with connected trail systems, if they can work together, if you could just put a little bit of additional investment in terms of parks infrastructure on top of maybe a stormwater management system that you were already going to invest in, there's a huge, huge additive value, again, for the community quality of life, for the environmental systems, for property values, and ultimately, again, elected officials can get reelected on this stuff. It's just really, really a win-win-win.
Completely agree. How you say it is as important as what you say, right? And that's exactly, Pete, you just described that, right? How we share the information or how we show what it is that our government is providing, a stormwater pond. Most people don't care, right? But when you tell them you've turned it into the most beautiful park in their backyard or in their neighborhood, man, they're interested. So how you share what the value is of this water body is as important as what it's actually doing quite often. And so you just can't narrate it in a more artful way than to get what you need sometimes out of the communities. And then again, the education, I think Keeli, I'm sure you'll have something to say on that for sure, is understanding why the stormwater pond in your backyard. I hear often in HOAs that the reason they bought that house was because it sat on the lake. And they just can't understand why there's so much ugly vegetation in the lake, but quite often that vegetation is doing a very important job, as we all know. So how you say it is important as what you say.
Let Keeli go next.
Can you hear me? Yeah. What I was going to say for Pete, because I know he's done a lot of these programs, but the community engagement piece beforehand is super important too. So we need to have our community at the table first and foremost to make sure that they even want this project to come forward. And you can do that by, send out a survey, but also have the public open house meetings. And I know Winter Haven actually does a very, very good job at that with their projects. I believe Seminole County is starting to do that with some of their parks projects coming as well. As the community though, you want to hear from them first. You don't want to just assume because it's great for us and we know all of the extra benefits. You want to get ahead of the game. So Pete, have you had some experience with public engagement and going to community meetings and stuff like that? Yeah. So, and again, like I've seen some maybe have a negative spin too, because they're like, well, you're putting water into my neighborhood, now we're gonna have mosquitoes and we're gonna have this. So that's a great opportunity to, up front, get that education, again, out there, but have other departments with you. So not just your utility, not just your watershed people, but bring in all the different departments and be able to showcase how great government truly is.
So just going to echo what everyone had said, but I think even if we just focus on, like, let's say stream restoration, taking canals and conveyances that people are used to seeing in their backyards, sometimes they think that's part of their yard, is their right of way, but it's not. It's maybe a county right of way or whatnot. A good example was in Pinellas County. We worked on a project. We had to bring in everyone in the community to even just get it passed as a concept, that we're going to take a canal and restore it into a multi-stage channel. And then the biggest complaint was people were going to lose where they were parking their boat, even though it was Pinellas County land. The really cool thing there, we had a very large Vietnamese community there, and we had all of the documents that were dispersed out, also in Vietnamese, not only in English and Spanish. So I think it's bringing all the stakeholders in, making sure everybody's understanding that they can even pitch in, the DOTs, the different districts, the different cities and counties, and we can kind of do a more collaborative effort. I think a lot of times the project will move forward in a stronger way. It may not be faster because there's more communication and everything, collaboration, but it will be stronger, I think.
Thank you, Mary. And one more question that actually started with your presentation. I started thinking about it, which is, and it goes to this very thing that you were just talking about, which is land. And we heard this morning on the first panel that down in South Florida, there's hardly any land left to do projects with, and that's going to be an increasing problem in communities. So I want each of the panelists to think about this. How do you deal with the fact that land is becoming scarce and very, very expensive part of a project?
So when you're trying to develop an alternative delivery type project, like a full delivery project where a private entity is trying to buy land, or even if the public entity is trying to acquire land for conservation, we have this new wave of land grabs that are occurring. And it's not only from the different data centers and development, things like that in Florida. It's also from solar fields, things like that, where we have to have energy, we have to have development, we need growth, but it's a most recent thing. So I think when you're trying to battle and build a forward or restoration project, and in areas that are highly being either developed or are developed, it makes it very difficult. So we have to plan really far in the future and just start looking now, I think, and finding out, okay, we're gonna plan on doing a one water project in this area, this region. We need to start looking at where those lands need to be acquired. And a lot of the districts are wonderful at that. A lot of the counties and cities are great, but I think I've also met several retiring land acquisition specialists at different water management districts and public entities. So they're not getting replaced. They're being either, kind of farmed out or whatnot, or they're just not interested in buying land anymore. So I think that's where the P3 component really comes into play. Have the private entity acquire the land as part of the full delivery project. And then that can then be passed on to either that entity, like the example of Alachua County or Polk County. And if they don't want to manage it, then we find a conservation trust, essentially, to take that land on. So we'll find someone to manage it, and we will provide an endowment of some sort, a non-wasting endowment that can allow for maintenance to occur in perpetuity, or for at least the period of the contract, so that that project is still maintained appropriately. So I think that's the biggest thing. You can build something, but if it starts to degrade and fail, as many of our environmental restoration projects do, or stormwater systems, they eventually have a time span, they have a lifespan. Maybe 15, 20 years, sometimes longer, depending on how quickly that area is growing. But we have to figure out a way to make sure that does occur for a longer period of time, at least throughout our careers. So I do think land is a critical component. That's a national issue. It's not just a Florida issue. It's worse in the more developed areas, obviously, but I do think we can manage that by at least planning for it now.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think, Pete, you had an image of a community where you had incorporated DOT runoff, the community's runoff, and I'm just going to assume one of those was a water management district advance as well, for our example. Right? Sure, there you go. I think what we looked at, though, was a new community, but I think if we really go back and examine our watersheds in urban environments today, we have all of those same things dotted all over those communities today. And so I think there are opportunities to create connections between those systems now in order to maximize and go back and reevaluate, maybe in a smaller spatial extent, quantity, timing, distribution, and water quality, again, from a slightly different extent, in order to be able to see how we might maximize being able to create the water quality improvements, that make available water where it wasn't, and start using maybe flood conveyances in ways that we can just move that water to places we might need it, instead of just managing it from a flood control perspective.
So I have a whole bunch of thoughts on this. I'm trying to figure out how to game them down. First of all, in an urban environment, there is going to be land use change. And it was by nature going to be more expensive than in a greenfield because you're in an urban environment. I work with a lot of cities that say we have a parking problem. And you look at it from the air and it's nothing but parking lots. And so it's kind of like puts this logic thing in your head, like what's going on? In an urban environment, particularly like if we were to take it downtown, like Winter Haven or one of the other kind of historic character downtowns all across Florida, in order for them to experience reinvestment, there are some shared things that have to be solved, and one of them is stormwater. So if you're talking about individual properties that are trying to position for reinvestment, and they all have to solve their own stormwater on site, that's a big problem. So if you can do a regional facility that clusters stormwater into one logical area that benefits multiple properties, there's a huge economic opportunity there, and it can be justified through real estate analysis and value analysis and tax generation analysis. So you want to cluster development in ways that are efficient and logical, and you want to put them proximate to open space networks that are efficient. The other thing is the notion, whether you're in the greenfield doing new development or you're in an urban area, everything is more expensive. Is there really money to build a separate stormwater system and a separate recreation and open space amenity system? Whether you're talking about an urban development or you're talking about greenfield development. If you can co-locate a smarter stormwater system with great parks and trail amenities, which incidentally, people will pay as much or more to live next to an environmental open space as they will to live on a golf course. There's a lot of economic data for that. And so if you can put things together, you can do more because you're not building separate systems. The last thing I would say is there's an enormous history. I would actually call it an environmental justice issue. There's a lot of areas, whether they're disinvested historic neighborhoods or just new development, where the solution to a stormwater problem was just to go and buy a block, demo the houses, put in a rectilinear pond, and you're out of there. And it's like, if you went into a more affluent area and tried to get away with that, you'd be thrown out of office immediately, And yet we're still building these things in suburban areas. And so for me, one of the things that I'm really interested, we've got a couple of, we have probably 5 or 6 really, really sophisticated, super cool, high design park stormwater things. Those are neat, but they're pretty expensive. I'm really interested in how to go into neighborhoods that have this legacy of just sort of old, antiquated stormwater management planning and parkify those things and make them really, really great amenities that increase quality of life and increase property values. And again, when you increase property values, you increase tax base, and you can make an economic case for certain things. We have to go into our urban areas and reinvent the way their infrastructure works. Because what we have in a lot of those areas now is just so out of date and so ineffectual on a lot of levels, and we can fix that.
Anything to add, Keely? If not, I'm going to move to our lightning question. Okay, that was amazing. So what an endorsement. So this is the lightning question. Each of you, in one sentence, make the best case for why OneWater is the best investment that any government, private, or any other entity should make. Make your one sentence, best case. Why don't we start with you, Mary? I can see the smile on your face.
You are a very difficult moderator, but I love you. I think this is great. I think from the One Water perspective, if we do not integrate all of the water resources that we have access to, then we're missing major opportunity. This is a long sentence. I get to extend it a little bit. But I heard the word legacy just a moment ago, and we're not only dealing with urban core, we have rural areas, previously, manipulated lands, not naming anything, agricultural areas that are going to be potentially converted. They all have to be taken into account. There's legacy, previous things that have occurred that have to be included. But if we don't incorporate those things, then we will potentially cause much larger issues and problems in the future. So we're still dealing with our current issues are kind of based on legacy problems. We have the path now and the understanding to be able to avoid those. So planning for future.
Yes, and I will echo that, but water is water is water, and we have a future. My kids, I guess, that's my sentence, my children.
It's the cost-effective answer to solve what we won't have tomorrow.
Nothing affects the nature of our communities more than the presence or absence of healthy, accessible, and managed water resources.
Excellent. What a great panel. Give them a big hand. Thank you very much. Now we have Cassidy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. That was such an amazing panel. All right, y'all. It's the best time of the day. It's lunchtime. So we have our catering set up over here on the